Today at the National Press Club, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. Fresh from a thumping election victory which saw Labor claim 94 seats, Mr Albanese will outline his priorities for a second term amid a backdrop of international trade uncertainty. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese with today's National Press Club address.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club of Australia for today's Westpac address, where our guest, of course, is the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. My name is Tom Connell, I'm the club's president and the Sky News chief election analyst as well. I was sort of musing today over the increased power that Labor does have. The first line that came to me was, "Great power comes with great responsibility." Depending on your sense of history, it's either Voltaire or Spider-Man. More apt, perhaps, for Labor, great power comes with great expectations. That can be the case in politics. The first term, of course, was a wafer-thin majority, complicated Senate and inflation stalking every potential policy idea. Those clouds are very much cleared for Labor. It will make life theoretically easier for them on the reform front. It will raise expectations, though, perhaps, particularly for supporters on what is possible with their appetite wet from IR changes and also Stage 3 tax cuts, if you think of what did happen in that first term. For those of you watching at home, you can join the conversation on Twitter, where our handle is PressClubAust, or you can use the hashtag NPC. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese.
Well, thanks very much. It's great to be back at the National Press Club. And I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting and pay my respect to elders, past, present and emerging. I want to acknowledge all my many colleagues who are joining me here today, and I say on behalf of every single Labor member and senator, we are humbled and honoured by the trust that the Australian people have placed in our government. Each and every day we're working to prove worthy of that trust, to stand up for Australia at a time of global uncertainty, to act on the immediate challenges confronting us, to seize the opportunities ahead of us, and to deliver the positive and ambitious agenda that we took to the Australian people. Now, back in May 2022, Australians voted for change, to change the government, to change the country, to change the way we engage with the world and the way our economy worked at home. In May 2025, Australians voted to make that change last, to build on the foundations we have laid, to carry forward the reforms that we have begun, and to see the rewards of their hard work reflected in their daily lives, with an economy that nourishes their aspiration and repays their efforts, and a society where everyone has the opportunity to fulfil their potential. Before the election, my colleagues and I were clear about our commitments and our approach, and the democratic verdict rendered by Australians was every bit as clear. On the 3rd of May, the Australian people voted for Australian values, for fairness, aspiration and opportunity for all, for a progressive patriotism where we are proud to do things our own way, where we recognise that our democracy, our commitment to fair wages and conditions, universal Medicare and universal superannuation are things that bring us together as Australians and set us apart from the world. And where we embrace the fact that one of the characteristics that makes this the best nation on earth is that all of us are driven by a determination to make it even better, to face global challenges, shape economic change and engage with our region in the Australian way, and to build a future where no one is held back and no one is left behind. On the 3rd of May, Australians voted for a government with the plans and policies to uphold and fulfil these values. Australians voted to strengthen Medicare and protect our world-leading pharmaceutical benefits scheme. Australians voted to build more homes and to make it possible for people to buy their first home with just a 5% deposit. Australians voted to embrace the opportunities of cleaner, cheaper, renewable energy and the new generation of jobs and industries that can power. Australians voted to strengthen our defence capability and strengthen our relationships in our region. Australians voted for new investment and new reform in every stage of education, from early childhood to schools to TAFE and university. Australians voted for greater opportunity for women, not as an add-on or an afterthought, but as a fundamental priority for our economy and our society. And Australians voted for a Labor government to keep delivering real and lasting help with their cost of living, keeping inflation down, keeping unemployment low, getting real wages up, taking new action to make sure that consumers don't get ripped off, delivering more direct assistance to families and small business, including energy bill relief, and helping people earn more and keep more of what they earn, with top-up tax cuts next year and then the year after, a new $1,000 instant tax deduction, and a continuing focus on lifting productivity and boosting real wages, including, of course, for nearly 3 million Australians on award wages who will receive another real pay rise on the 1st of July. Our government has secured a mandate to act. Our tax cuts are already legislated despite the Liberals and Nationals voting against them. And when the new Parliament sits next month, the first piece of legislation we will introduce will cut student debt by 20%. This will save around 3 million Australians an average of $5,500 each. And, as promised, it will be backdated so that it applies from the 1st of June this year before indexation. By next year, the 5% deposit plan that we took to the election will be open to every Australian looking to buy their first home. It will be available for homes valued all the way up to the average price in every city and every region. And if you buy your first home through this plan, you won't have to pay a single dollar in mortgage insurance. Our government will cover it. This will make a real difference for so many Australians. Instead of being stuck trying to save while their rent pays someone else's mortgage, they'll be paying off their own home. From the 1st of January, medicines on the PBS will cost no more than $25 per script, the lowest price since 2004. For pensioners and concession card holders, the price of a script will be frozen at just $7.70 until the end of this decade. And at the same time, 1-800 Medicare will be up and running, free, 24/7, expert health advice, only a phone call away. I want to start opening the 50 new Medicare urgent care clinics we promised this year, and we want them all open by the middle of next year. Combined with the 87 we've already opened, this will mean that 4 out of every 5 Australians will live within 20 minutes of a clinic. Already, 1.5 million Australians have visited one of these clinics, and all they have needed is just this. You'd be disappointed if it didn't appear. Their Medicare card. That is all that they have needed. Now, our government is focused on delivery. We know that delivery matters for all those Australians who voted Labor, for lower taxes, for stronger Medicare, better education and new help with the cost of living. Delivering these commitments matters for every Australian, regardless of who they voted for. It matters for our economy, for the jobs, skills, technology, infrastructure and energy we need to grow and thrive in the years ahead. It also matters for our democracy. We are living in a time of significant global uncertainty, and that reaches beyond just economic instability. It is the more corrosive proposition that politics and government and democratic institutions, including a free media, are incapable of meeting the demands of this moment. Some simply dismiss such sentiment. Others cynically seek to harvest it. Our responsibility is to disprove it, to recognise that some of this frustration is drawn from people's real experiences, the feeling that government isn't working for them. To counter this, we have to offer the practical and positive alternative, to prove that a good, focused, reforming Labor government can make a real and positive difference to people's lives. And that we can do this while building for the future too. A future which delivers on our vision for a stronger, fairer Australia. Indeed, an Australia that is stronger because it is fairer. A future where we realise our potential as a renewable energy superpower. A future where we have a thriving, advanced manufacturing industry, where education enriches our human potential from universal, affordable early learning through properly funded schools and a dynamic tertiary sector. Our vision is for a society that is a microcosm for the world, where all are respected and valued and our diversity is recognised as a strength, where our international relationships in the fastest growing region of the world in human history benefit us, but also provide a platform for us to play a positive and stabilising global role in uncertain times. Our government's vision and ambition for Australia's future was never dependent on the size of our majority, but you can only build for that future vision if you build confidence that you can deliver on urgent and immediate necessities. How you do that is important too, ensuring that the actions of today anticipate and create conditions for further reform tomorrow. And that is why so many of our election commitments for our second term built on reforms we had introduced and were implementing in our first term. Our agenda has been shaped by the lives and priorities of the Australian people, and it is built on Australian values. It is the mission and the measure of a Labor government to give those enduring ideals of fairness, aspiration and opportunity, renewed and deeper meaning for more Australians, to deliver reforms that hold no one back and drive progress that leaves no one behind. This is no small task. It demands we aim high and requires us to build big. That's why the very heart of our campaign was the biggest ever investment in Medicare, driving to a target of 9 out of every 10 visits to the GP being fully bulk billed by 2030, because we understand that for Medicare to remain a profound expression of the fair go, for it to be a continuing source of national pride for decades to come, it must rise to meet the new challenges in health and primary care, and it must deliver for people in every part of our country. Through an entire decade in government, the Liberals and Nationals invested less than $5 billion in housing. Our $43 billion Homes for Australia plan sets a goal of building 1.2 million new homes before the end of this decade, because we know that boosting supply is the key. And we also understand that for the aspiration of home ownership to remain the great Australian dream, it must be achievable for this generation of Australians. This same sense of responsibility to future generations is why we are working to meet the environmental challenges of climate change and seize the economic opportunities of the energy transition. We've legislated our 43% emissions reduction target by 2030 and our commitment to net zero by 2050. We are delivering our energy policy, renewables backed by gas, batteries and hydro. And we're investing in our economic sovereignty, our capacity to make more things here, with our plan for a future made in Australia. As I said on election night, this is a time of profound opportunity for our nation, because when you consider the resources and energy and technology that a world moving to net zero needs, when you look at our world-leading universities and researchers and TAFEs and startups, when you think about the change in comparative advantage that is occurring, we're having the space to co-locate extraction, refining and processing and manufacturing is of increasing significance as a proportion of the cost of production compared to the cost of labour. When you think about what global investors in data centres and green metals and clean energy are looking for, truly There is nowhere else in the world you'd rather be than right here in Australia. But for all of our national strengths and natural advantages, our success is not guaranteed. Nothing is going to be given to us, and the world is not waiting for us. To realise this opportunity, shape it, and make it our own, we have to move quickly to build an economy that is more dynamic, more productive, and more resilient. Now, this doesn't mean dismissing the policies or the values that we took to the last election. It means working together to fulfil them and build on them. The commitments the Australian people voted for in May are the foundation of our mandate. They are not the limits of our responsibilities or of our vision. The way we deal with big challenges and opportunities from our first term, from economic growth and productivity to the energy transition, will continue to evolve, and there will be new challenges to meet at home and overseas. In December of 2022, we responded to the worst global energy crisis since the 1970s by bringing together what was then the New South Wales Liberal government of Dominic Perrottet and the Queensland Labor government of Anastasia Palaszczuk to impose price caps on gas and coal. Now, none of us had taken that commitment to an election, but all of us recognised that we had a responsibility to act in the interests of Australians, or take our world-leading legislation creating an age limit for social media. Now, that arose from a courageous campaign led by parents and backed by the Australian media. Our government answered those calls, and this was passed with bipartisan support. This is about government creating a community standard as well as a legal one, making it clear that social media companies have a social responsibility, and importantly, giving parents and teachers a signal they can point to when they're talking with children about how to engage with technology safely. This matters, and we won't be taking a backward step on it. Being in government also means you can pursue unexpected opportunities. It has been 14 years since the Gonski Review identified the schooling resource standard. Now, for the first time ever, we have agreement between every state and territory and the Commonwealth on the funding and reforms to get us there, to ensure that every Australian student in every Australian school will get the funding they need to reach their full potential. Now, this goes above and beyond what we promised at the 2022 election, and delivering it wasn't a matter of issuing public demands or waving around a blank cheque. It took patient, constructive and direct engagement with the states and territories and the education sector to ensure that every Commonwealth dollar spent on schools will be linked to real reform. I look at this breakthrough as a model for our future engagement with the states and territories on other areas of shared responsibility, a chance to secure lasting, meaningful agreement on funding for public hospitals and ensuring the National Disability Insurance Scheme is on a sustainable footing. Just as cooperation between different levels of government is vital for securing the services and support that Australians expect and deserve, cooperation between government, business and unions is essential to securing our future growth and prosperity. Over the last 3 years, we have all worked together to put the worst of global inflation behind us, to bring inflation down without sacrificing people's jobs or cutting the wages and services that Australians rely on. With 2 interest rate cuts already this year, there is a growing sense that our economy is turning the corner. Making our way forward depends on what all of us can work together to achieve. And that's why I've asked the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, to convene a roundtable to support and shape our government's growth and productivity agenda. At Parliament House in August, we will bring together a group of leaders from the business community, the union movement and civil society. This will be a more streamlined dialogue than the Jobs and Skills Summit, dealing with a more targeted set of issues. We want to build the broadest possible base of support for further economic reform, to drive growth, boost productivity, strengthen the budget and secure the resilience of our economy in a time of global uncertainty. What we want is a focused dialogue and constructive debate that leads to concrete and tangible actions. The starting point for our government is clear. Our plan for economic growth and productivity is about Australians earning more and keeping more of what they earn. We want to build an economy where growth, wages and productivity all rise together. This work is already underway, including our National Productivity Fund, incentivising state and territory governments to drive efficiencies in construction. Our new measures in the budget in March, including the reform of non-compete clauses and new action on national standards for occupational licensing. In the next 3 years, we want to expand on this approach, and I'm optimistic about the progress that we can make because there is substantial agreement on so many of the key priorities: driving faster approvals for housing, energy and infrastructure projects while ensuring sustainability, making it easier for Australian innovators to commercialise their breakthroughs and create jobs in Australia, investing in the skills our nation needs and making sure those qualifications are recognised nationwide, ensuring all Australians are better prepared to capitalise on the opportunities of artificial intelligence while making sure that we secure ourselves against its risks, and continuing the work that we've done through Services Australia to make it easier for people to access and navigate the government services that they rely upon. Now, some of this is about government doing the basics better, targeting duplication, removing barriers to investment and reducing the cost of doing business. But not every challenge can be solved by government stepping back. This is a time where government has to be prepared to step up, to invest in education and skills and research and innovation, to build and upgrade the infrastructure that supports growth and drives productivity, to combine our Future Made in Australia plan, our critical minerals strategic reserve, and our new investment framework with a deeper and more diversified trade agenda, especially in our region, and to provide business and industry with the certainty to invest in all their assets, technology, energy, and most of all, their people. Again, this is where the way that we make change, the how, matters, because change that is imposed unilaterally by government rarely endures. Key to lasting change is a reform that Australians own and understand, reform that clearly serves a national purpose and the national interest, change that empowers and engages people with a sense of choice and agency, change that generates its own momentum and builds its own staying power. That's the long-term, lasting change that our government wants to deliver, and we respect the vital role that the Australian Public Service has to play in this. Today, I'm pleased to confirm the appointment of Dr. Stephen Kennedy as Secretary of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, and Jenny Wilkinson as Secretary to the Treasury, the first woman to be appointed to that vital role. These outstanding public servants will continue to excel in their service to our nation. I am delighted that Dr. Kennedy and Ms Wilkinson have accepted my invitations to serve. And I do want to take this opportunity to publicly thank Glyn Davis, the outgoing Secretary, for his service and his ongoing extraordinary contribution to our great nation. Over the next 3 years, we are focused on delivering what Australians voted for on May the 3rd. And in the conversation about future economic reform, we should also remember what Australians voted against, because Australians overwhelmingly rejected policies designed to drive down wages, undermine job security and take flexibility away from working families. Australians voted against mass sackings in the public service and the damage that would do to our social safety net. Australians rejected nuclear power, not just because of its staggering cost, but because people recognise the Liberals and Nationals plan for what it was, a last desperate attempt to delay action on climate change and derail the transition to renewable energy. And Australians voted against importing conflicts and ideologies that have no basis in our national culture or character. They rejected policies copied from overseas that would only leave us a smaller, narrower, less generous and more divided country. Instead, our people chose to face global challenges in the Australian way. And that is precisely the way for us to compete and succeed in the world and grow and prosper here at home. Our own way, on our terms, in our interests. Not seeking to imitate low-wage economies, not leaving people behind in the scramble for some perceived advantage. Not trading away the things that make us the best country on earth, trusting in our national values, building on our national strengths, and backing our people, rewarding their hard work, investing in their talent and nourishing their aspiration. My colleagues and I understand that every day in government is a privilege, and with optimism, urgency, purpose and determination, we intend to make every single day count. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Prime Minister. So the Productivity Summit, you alluded to the one in the previous term on IR as well. Some of the business leaders in the wake of that said they felt like things were too slanted towards what the unions wanted. How would you reassure them this time around that it's worth participating and it will be a level playing field?
Well, we're a Labor government. We support unions existing, and some of the commentators preferred that unions didn't exist. That's the truth. But we will always respect both the role of business and the role of unions. And one of the things that I say is that there are common interests that you can't have. I say this to unions as well. You don't get union members unless you've got successful employers. And it's the private sector that drives an economy. What the public sector should do is facilitate private sector activity and private sector investment. And that's what my government is focused on. We will invite people to the gathering, the round table, will be held in Parliament House. I've been working with Jim and the economic team. Jim will have more to say about it when he appears at the National Press Club here next week. But we want to have open and honest conversations, not shut down conversations by saying if someone raises an issue, that means you immediately go from A to Z, which is often what happens. But early in the term, the Jobs and Skills Summit led to, I tell you what, without it, we would have greater skills shortages in this country. We wouldn't have free TAFE. We wouldn't have the $10,000 incentives that we have for people in construction and energy. We wouldn't have those issues being addressed with, and a more rational discussion as well about the role that migration plays in that. So we will be respectful. We want people to participate in the spirit of goodwill in which we're making this suggestion.
Thank you. All right, well, we have what we call in the TV business a heart out of 135 and a list that would have a whole AFL side, including a sub. So I'll ask our questioners to be to the point, beginning with Michelle Grattan from The Conversation.
Prime Minister, you spoke of using the federal government's funding leverage to get reform in areas where it has indirect rather than direct power, and you particularly mentioned Gonski. Can I ask you about hospitals, though? They were a preoccupation of your predecessor, Kevin Rudd. Do you think that the present hospital system in Australia is fit for purpose? You've got a funding agreement coming up in a year or two to negotiate a long-term agreement. What areas of reform would the federal government be particularly looking for in trying to negotiate with the states in this area that's of preoccupation, I think, to a lot of people concerned about the health sector?
Well, thanks, Michelle. We have an ageing of the population, and that's part of the challenge. that we have to deal with, but we came to an agreement with $1.7 billion extend the hospital agreement to enable us to then have a discussion, not in the context of a looming election, but to have a discussion about how it fits together. The public hospital system, primary health care, the creation of urgent care clinics really has made a substantial difference in taking pressure off EDs and provides for a middle path, if you like, and has been enormously successful. The satisfaction rates for people who go to an urgent care clinic are extraordinary, which is why we announced an additional 50. The aged care reforms that we have had to delay some of the implementation to make sure it's got right, but that shows an example of where we were able to get agreement, and credit to the former minister for the work that Annika Wells did in that area. So a lot of it is cost shifting because there are people in hospital beds who would be better for them as well as better for the country's finances as a whole, for there to be a more efficient and sensible way of dealing with the delineation between Commonwealth responsibility and state and territory responsibility. And that's what we intend to work through. I think similarly, the NDIS, there are people going on to the NDIS. The numbers mean that growth that we inherited, that was pretty close to 20%, was simply unsustainable, and the system would just collapse. So how do you get rational decision making that is providing for the best service possible but delivered in the most efficient way possible by each level of government is the starting point.
Next question, Jane Norman from the ABC.
Hello, Prime Minister Jane Norman. Thank you for your address today and for your ongoing support of the club. I wanted to ask you about defence spending, as it is an issue that's being considered globally at the moment. You've said time and time again that you don't want to set an arbitrary target where other countries around the world have started to sort of accelerate their funding. I just wanted to ask for sort of an insight into your thinking. So if you're not going to set an arbitrary target, that's fair enough, but do you accept the global trend at the moment is to accelerate defence funding in this challenging strategic environment? And are you sort of open to lifting Australia's ambition above and beyond what's already been announced and budgeted for?
Well, we have $57 billion over 10 years, $10 billion over the forwards of additional investment. Seems to me that if the Health Minister or the Comms Minister or the Infrastructure Minister came to us and said, we want you to spend X percentage of GDP, but we won't tell you what it's for, that they wouldn't get far in an ERC process. And there is no reason why defence shouldn't be governed by anything other than one factor. What do we need? What is the capability we need to keep us safe? Our capability will always be supported, any submissions, by myself as Prime Minister, because our first order is to keep us safe. And we do that through capability, but we do it through something else as well. Our relationships, the work that we have done with our neighbours, including Papua New Guinea and Indonesia, has been, I think, a real distinction between what we inherited and our status with ASEAN nations and Pacific Island Forum nations and Indian Ocean nations as well. And that is one of the things that we need to take account of as well, and something that my government is very focused on.
So the percentage of a GDP spending on defence could go up, but it will be based on needs rather than here's a figure. Is that fair to say in future budget?
Yeah, of course. We will always provide for capability that's needed. But you saw the alternative. You don't have to theorise about it. You saw it during the election campaign. An announcement of $21 billion by the coalition. They couldn't say where it was coming from or where it was going to. Australians voted on 3rd of May against a frankly, unprepared for government opposition, which was unprepared in so many ways. The only area in which they were prepared was in rhetoric. And you can't defend a country with rhetoric, you defend it with assets.
Mark Riley from 7 News.
Prime Minister, we had quite a debate during the campaign on housing, but mostly for first home buyers, with supply and demand side promises. And while we were out there on the campaign trail, the mean price of a house in Australia went above $1 million for the first time, and affordability is a massive issue, but so is supply. Your housing minister just in the last couple of days has said it's just too hard to build a house in Australia. You have two big targets out there, 1.2 million houses, 100,000 for first home buyers. What will you do specifically, and what do you want the states to do to make it easier to build a house in Australia?
It is too hard, and one of the areas is regulation. So there's a conscious decision made by myself as PM to appoint Claire O'Neill as Minister for Housing and Cities, because one of the things that we have to do is to make it easier. Developers say that it's just too complex, adds to costs as well. So we have to look at ways in which we can bring costs down. I must say that the actions of state governments right around the country are very positive in, the courage, frankly, that someone like Chris Minns has shown. To give one example, on Rose Hill, he was right. He was absolutely right in putting forward something that was controversial, and in the end, people knocked back in spite of the fact it had the support of the leadership of the racing industry. But that's the sort of thing that we're going to need to do. You can't deal with supply issues without having the courage to do things like that, or indeed my local government area in the Inner West has produced a plan for planning that leads to substantially tens of thousands of additional people close to public transport. There'll be blowback for that. I'm sure I'll get representations as the local member. But you've got to be prepared to do that. But what Claire has pointed towards is a very conscious decision. We had discussions when I was working out the ministry, and she has clear ideas about how to cut through. Some of that regulation is national, and that's what, in terms of building standards, just unnecessary regulation. We want to make sure that housing is fit for purpose and all of that. But if we can cut through on some of the red tape, then that will reduce costs.
Next question, Anna Henderson from SBS.
Thank you. It's been an extremely traumatic time over the last week or so in the Indigenous community across the country. We've had the death in custody of 24-year-old disabled Warlpiri man Kumanjai White, and a separate death in custody investigation after the death of a 68-year-old Wadeye man who was remembered for his work lobbying for bilingual education. Advocates say on average 40 Aboriginal people have been taken into custody in the NT every day since August 2024 after the legal changes in that jurisdiction, and 88% of the prison population in the NT is Indigenous. Has your government and previous governments, as Marion Scrimgeour, your envoy, said this week, dropped the ball on dealing with the death in custody issue in this country? And the North Australian Aboriginal Justice Agency is now urging a federal intervention into the NT justice system. Is that something you're considering?
Can I say that something I've said before? All governments have not done well enough in any of these areas. We, attempted during our last term to break with business as usual. We attempted to do that. I think we, can't be accused of shying away from that. We did it. And we did it because we needed to engage in a different way with First Nations people. Look, I'm confident that Malarndirri McCarthy, my minister, who I don't think I'm breaching her privacy here, who's dealt with the death of her father over the weekend, which is why she isn't here, is dealing with those issues, personal issues, but then she will, I think, be very focused on how do we do better. Now, in general, the idea of federal intervention, which is frankly an easy thing that people come up with, why aren't you sending the AFP? Why aren't you doing that? Without then saying where it leads. I need to be convinced that people in Canberra know better than people in the Northern Territory about how to deal with these issues, is my starting point. I think it comes out all the time with a range of issues. But we do need to engage directly and constructively with First Nations people. Now, people voted clearly in the referendum against the model that was put forward by First Nations people themselves in the Uluru Constitutional Convention in 2017. But we need to find different ways of engaging respectfully, of listening in a different form as well.
Thank you.
Next question comes from Andrew Clennell from Sky News.
Prime Minister, Angus Houston, the co-author of your Defence Strategic Review, told the US Studies Centre last November that AUKUS boats, quote, must be a net addition to Australia's military capability. The only way they can be a net addition to Australia's military capability is to increase our defence spending to 3% of GDP as we move into and through the 2030s. Will you take note of what he said? It may be in Australia's interest to stand up to the US on trade, but is it really in our interest to stand up to Donald Trump when it comes to how much we spend on defence? And if we don't spend more on defence, couldn't the Americans threaten to not build or give us the AUKUS submarines?
Well, I think that Australia should decide what we spend on Australia's defence. Simple as that. That's my view. Now, if others think that that's not the case, then it's up to them to make that case. Angus Houston's been a friend of mine for a very long period of time, and I always pay attention to anything that Angus Houston has to say. But I've made it very clear. We will support the capability that Australia needs. I notice in your question you haven't put forward one thing that we should be investing in that we're not investing in. That's
Angus Houston told you that two things?
That's my point. That's my point. Arbitrary figures, lead to a cul-de-sac. And we want to make sure as well that every single dollar that defence spends results in actual assets. And under the former government, there are a lot of media releases, just not many assets. And what we want to do is to make sure that we improve the capability of our defence forces, and that's what we're doing. For example, by manufacturing missiles here, which will be manufactured this year, something that never happened before.
Phil Curry from the AFR.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, Pam. I want to go back to Tom's question about the Productivity Summit, because there was a lot of cynicism in the business community after the Jobs and Skills Summit that most of the, if not all of those outcomes were preordained, especially on IR. Now, it's hard to talk to a business group about productivity at the moment without them mentioning the first and second tranches of IR laws. You passed in the first term, and you've got plans now to enshrine penalty rates in legislation. Is your message to any of the business groups going to attend your summit, don't waste your breath if you're going to raise IR?
People are entitled to raise whatever they want to raise. But I'm a Labor Prime Minister and I support penalty rates. I'm a Labor Prime Minister and I support real wages increasing. I'm a Labor Prime Minister and I support an economy that works for people, not people working for an economy. And, if we look at the differentials of how workers on the minimum wage have come out in the last 20 years, pick whatever figure you like, and how chief executives of the top ASX companies are going, I reckon workers would be, happy to be halfway to where their increases have come. So workers getting a fair crack is not something that is, something that we will abandon. we support workers getting a fair crack for their contribution. What we do support is companies being successful. We support proper negotiation between workers and businesses to achieve productivity improvements, and we support living standards not going backwards. I spoke a lot in the speech about the Australian way, and one of the things that the Australian way is to not have people who feel like they don't have a stake in the economy. And I think we see that in some places in the world, and a rise of populism, whether of the far right or the far left, as a result of that. That's not what I'm seeking here. I'm seeking an Australian way that does things differently, that looks at some of the division that's there in some international societies and says, gee, it's a good thing that people feel like they have a stake in Australian society and in our success. And that's something that I think is a big division in Australian society. I mean, we put forward a submission to the Fair Work Commission in our first cabinet meeting, was approved of this year, just like it was in 2022. It's resulted in a real wage increase. Is that a good thing? Yes, it is.
Thanks. Next question, Charles Croucher from the Nine Network.
Hello, Prime Minister. You've seen the vision of Lauren Tomasi, my colleague and friend, who was shot while doing her job covering the situation in Los Angeles yesterday. If you get a chance to speak with Donald Trump in the next 7 days, will you raise that incident? And what were your thoughts when you saw what happened?
Well, I spoke with Lauren this morning, and she's going okay. She's pretty resilient, I've got to say. But that footage was horrific. That was the footage of an Australian journalist doing what journalists do at their very best, which is to go into an environment that's not comfortable, but where in LA it is not unreasonable to think that she would not have been targeted with a rubber bullet. It is not unreasonable to think that she could go about her coverage clearly, as people can see the footage, clearly identified as media. And so we have already raised these issues with the US administration. We don't find it acceptable that it occurred, and we think the role of the media is particularly important.
Is that something you'll raise personally, though, with the President?
Well, discussions I have with the President are discussions between myself and the President. That's the way I deal with people, diplomatically, appropriately and with respect. So I'll leave the discussions with the President till they occur rather than foreshadow them.
You said targeted. Was that how it was raised by the Australian government, that she was seemingly targeted by police?
Well, she was clearly identified. And, there was no ambiguity. She wasn't, wearing a trackie. She was wearing a helmet, and something identified her as media. And, it is not acceptable that a journalist, and I say this here at the National Press Club, from time to time, I will have disagreements with journalists. That won't shock you. Sometimes even with Sky journalists. But, I respect the role that the media play, and people should respect the role that the media play in our modern society.
I know you've never disagreed with a question from Greg Brown from the Australian.
Never.
Thanks, PM. In the context of the debate about defence spending, you've said that we have strategic competition in the region, but I was hoping for you to really simplify that so voters understand your thinking on this. So do you think China is a national security threat to Australia?
I think that our engagement with the region and the world needs to be diplomatic, needs to be mature, and needs to avoid the attempts to simplify what are a complex set of relationships. And Australian journalists should do the same. And I believe...
But isn't it less about simplifying it, like for what you're arguing?
We have strategic competition in the region.
But does that mean China is a potential military threat to Australia?
We have strategic competition in the region. We have that. We have a Defence Strategic Review which outlines what Australia's defence needs are. And we engage constructively in the region, including with China and including with ASEAN nations. And what we say is that it is in Australia's interests and indeed the world's interests for there to be peace and security in our region and indeed around the world. That's our position. That's the mature way in which we are able, as a middle power, to exercise influence in the region.
Next question, Paul Sakar from the SMH and The Age.
Thanks, Prime Minister. Thanks, Tom. Prime Minister, you might meet the US President next week. Would you be willing to walk away from that meeting without a deal if the Americans don't offer a good one? And on the productivity roundtable, if there are big ideas that come out of it, do you commit to go into the next election with those policies, or could you legislate in the interim?
Well, on the latter, I don't want to preempt it. I want people to be able to have a discussion. To be able to have a discussion without screaming headlines saying, yeah, this is going to happen because someone has raised it. I want people to be able to have a mature discussion around a room to see where is it, are there win-wins on productivity, are there win-wins, I think, in a whole range of areas. For example, on, approvals, things that was in the speech, approvals of things like housing, industry, how do we get things moving quicker but which are more sustainable as well? How do we use that to boost productivity going forward? And on any arrangements, as we did with the European Union, we'll only sign up to things that are in Australia's national interest. So on things like the Pharmaceutical Benefit Scheme, the Media Bargaining Code, our biosecurity in agriculture, they're not on the table as far as we're concerned. But are there areas in which Australia and the United States can have win-wins? Yes, I believe that there are, and I will engage in those discussions respectfully, as we have over recent months.
Next question, Dana Daniel from the Canberra Times.
Thank you, Prime Minister. You've spoken about the importance of a free media to democracy. Traditional media companies have lost millions of dollars in revenue since Meta stopped paying for news on its platforms, and they say that this threatens their viability. Your government's announcement in December that a levy would be imposed on those who refuse to pay seemed to hit a wall after Donald Trump's tariff announcement, and a promised discussion paper is overdue. Will the progressive patriotism that you spoke about in your speech include Australia leading the world in safeguarding the viability of public interest journalism? And how soon can we expect the news media bargaining incentive to be legislated?
We certainly support the News Bargaining Code, and we've made it very clear, for example, to the US, and we made it clear publicly that that's not on the table any more than the social media ban for under 16s is on the table either. We respect the role of particularly local papers. As a local here in Canberra, it plays a vital role, and it is of critical importance that those media organisations are able to survive. Now, media is changing. Legacy media isn't everything, but it's important, and I respect the role that it plays, just like I respect new media as well. I did well documented. I did 20 podcasts this year leading up to the election. I'll do other, I've got another one on Thursday morning. I'll continue to engage because you have to engage with people where they are. But where they are, Canberra Times is a good example. You have articles about local issues, including ones that are very difficult to read, including Josh Papali's 2 tries against us on Sunday. That brings heartache. But it's a wonderful story. It's a great story from a great Canberran, and he was page 1 of the Canberra Times in the lead up to that game, breaking the record for most number of games played. The Telegraph or the Herald weren't covering that, couldn't care less about that because it wasn't a big deal. It's a big deal in this town, in this city, and that's important. It's an example of why local media is essential.
So whatever Donald Trump might say, no compromise, no changes?
No, we're dealing with our policies, including on the News Media Bargaining Code.
Okay. Next question, Ben Westcott from Bloomberg.
Ben Westcott from Bloomberg. Thank you for your speech, Prime Minister. And speaking of podcasts, we'd welcome you on the Bloomberg Australia podcast anytime you want to pop on over.
Speak to Ms Murphy.
Sure. I want to get some clarity on the Port of Darwin. During the election campaign, you said you wanted to see it back in Australian hands, but we do know since then there has been some approaches by US companies to potentially look into purchasing the port or taking the lease. Are you adamant that it must be in Australian hands after it leaves Landbridge, or would a friendly partner nation also be okay?
Well, private equity has a different perspective, of course, when it comes to investing in infrastructure. And so you'd want to examine what the nature of any bid is. But I've said very clearly that it is in my view, we won't preempt those processes, but my view is very clear and was clear at the time of the federal government, coalition government, giving an incentive to the Northern Territory coalition or CLP government to flog off what was, in my view, an Australian national asset. So I think it should be in Australian hands, is what I've said very clearly, and I'd need some convincing of that. I think that was a wrong decision. I haven't changed my view since it was made.
Thanks.
Tessa Conomu from AAP.
Thank you very much for your time, Prime Minister. Millennials and Gen Z are making up a greater share of the electorate, and despite both being younger voters, Gen Z are less anchored to the two-party system. What impact will this have on policy and your messaging?
I think we saw during the election campaign a different campaign in how to reach those people. I did last week, I was in I've slowed down since the election. I did Hobart, South Australia, Perth, Melbourne, Sydney and Canberra last week. And I did FM radios on a whole range of those, as well as AM radios. And doing a podcast on Thursday, you've got to talk with people where they're at and engage with them about issues. I frankly was somewhat surprised at the decision by the coalition to oppose the cut in HECS. I thought that was, at least as tone deaf as supporting an increase in income tax rates, which is what they went to the election with, or opposing working from home. You've got to look at the changes that are there in society and how we engage with people and what are their issues that they're concerned with. And a whole lot of new media, I won't give free ads to the ones that are, engage with those people and reflect what their opinions are going forward. So I think it will change the way that politics works. One of the things I'm really proud about is this morning we had a gathering of new members of Parliament, their sort of O week, where they come along, and I was able to speak to them, including, 21-year-old Senator Charlotte from South Australia. I look around everything from the cabinet room to the caucus. We have more women in the House of Representatives whose name begins in A, starting with Annika Wells, than Liberal or Nationals have women on the floor of the House of Representatives. Our team are diverse, and that includes a range of younger people, not just 21-year-olds, but other people in their 20s and early 30s who've got elected. That's great. That's what the Parliament should be. It should reflect Australian society.
Do you ever get a bit nervous when maybe a younger staff member sends out a bit of an edgy Insta post and you're not quite sure what it means, but you're assured it's going to go well?
That's why they give us young staff to explain it. No, look, I think politics has changed as well. Like, people I say this at National Press Club so it'll appear in a transcript in future years. People need to chill out about stuff that people will have on social media. If people are held to account for what a 21-year-old has on social media in 10 years' time, then we won't have anyone willing to put their hand up in public life. It needs to change the whole way that we deal with those issues as part of the way of dealing with it. So less, we don't go through what people put on social media. It's up to them. They're accountable for it, but there's no centralisation of that because it just wouldn't work. It just wouldn't work at all. And I understand the pressures that young people, are under, which is very different from the pressures that were on. I wouldn't particularly appreciate everything being documented when I was in Young Labor, let me tell you.
All right, on that note, we're trying to get through two more. Karen Barlow from the Saturday paper.
Hello, Prime Minister. Both the new leaders of the Coalition and the Greens, Susan Lee and Larissa Waters, have indicated a different approach to Labor this coming term, reflecting, I guess, their personal styles as well as Labor's thumping majority. What's your approach in this coming term about negotiating your agenda? Are you going to get more involved in some of the negotiations? What are you going to be doing this term? How are you going to approach it?
I lead a cabinet government that empowers ministers. So ministers go off and negotiate, but there's nothing unusual about me involving myself at some stage, usually with Senator Gallagher, when it gets to the crunch. And we did that last December. I foreshadow things that aren't negotiable, and I did that on the front page of the Herald, I think, that week of the last sitting week. But we got a phenomenal amount of legislation done. We got a whole lot done as well when Parliament resumed in February, and then on budget week, like one of the things that people missed, I think, was on the Wednesday, just how much we got through the Senate, both houses, which is why we start from a position where a whole lot of our budget and forward agenda is through. Free TAFE, NBN, tax cuts, through, done and dusted. But I'm respectful. I contacted both the leaders. I've sat down already with Susan Lee, as well as sitting down with David Littleproud. I've offered to sit down with Larissa Waters. I welcome constructive dialogue. I welcome input as well. We'll treat the crossbenchers with respect. We have 94 votes, but that actually doesn't make a difference compared with 78, because 78 wins and 94 wins. You don't win bigger, you win. You pass legislation. We treat people with respect. If they've got ideas, we're up for it. We're up for it. And I welcome the fact that Susan has made some constructive discussion, and the Larissa as well. But, you know, we'll wait and see. The proof will be in the pudding. I think they've both got issues with their internals. That, fortunately for me, is something that I don't have.
We'll see Susan Lee here on the 25th as a bit of a plug. Final question, Katina Curtis from the West Australian.
Thanks, Prime Minister. You've obviously spoken about doing things the Australian way. There does seem to be an American book that has been passed around your economics team, Abundance, from Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson. Several of them have referenced it. Have you read it? How do you see that abundance agenda applying in Australia? And one of the things it talks about a lot, particularly around housing, is the way that people who just don't want progress because they want to hold on to what they've got kind of weaponise environmental laws and litigation. That's obviously in a US context, but I think we see it happening here with NIMBYism. How do you intend to stop that?
Well, I'm not going to comment on a book that I haven't read, which is probably a good idea. I'm old-fashioned. I only launch books that I read, which caused, in the last term, Daniel Molino, who wrote a 3,500 page book, for me to not launch his book, as worthy as I'm sure it was. But I did launch Andrew Charlton's book, where it was much more smaller. So, hint there for parliamentary colleagues, if you want me to launch your book, make it a bit shorter so it's realistic for me to do so, given the amount of reading of cabinet papers, etc., that I have to do. So I won't comment on that. Suffice to say, look, our job is to just serve our national interests. I think that Australian characteristics and Australian politics are different from the United States. I think that the events we're seeing in the United States are something that no doubt many books will be written about in future years, and at some stage down the track I'll have time to read them, but I can't imagine that being the case over the next 3 years.
Well, thank you very much for your time today, Prime Minister. It's not quite a Medicare card, but we've got another membership to add to your collection.
You only need one Medicare card.
You can pull that out again if you want. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese. Thank you. There's another one.
That was National Press Club with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. We'll get more analysis in just a moment with our national political lead, David Spears, and National Affairs correspondent, Jane Norman, who are at the Press Club. But first, let's get you across the day's top stories. A political standoff is continuing between officials in Los Angeles and the White House as the US president sends in more forces to crack down on protesters. Donald Trump says an additional 2,000 National Guard members will be sent to help respond to demonstrations in LA following immigration raids. 700 Marines will also be sent in to protect property and personnel. LA Mayor Karen Bass says the raids need to be stopped and power needs to be handed back to the governor. Governor Gavin Newsom has already announced the state plans to sue the administration. US Marines have been deployed domestically for major disasters, but it's extremely rare that they're used for policing. Tasmania's Parliament has been debating budget supply bills to ensure public servants can continue to be paid during an expected election campaign. Premier Jeremy Rockliff has flagged he'll ask the governor for a snap election once the bills pass, after losing a no-confidence motion in Parliament last week. If the governor agrees to the request, it'll be the fourth time in 7 years Tasmanians will head to the polls. There's been international condemnation of Israel's interception of a ship which tried to break the blockade of aid to the Gaza Strip. French President Emmanuel Macron has called Israel's move shameful and scandalous. 6 of the 12 activists who were on board are French. Israel's Defence Minister Israel Katz says the crew, including the climate campaigner Greta Thunberg, will be deported. Major fertility group has incorrectly transferred the wrong embryo to a patient. In an announcement, the Australian Stock Exchange, Monash IVF, says the incident happened last week at its Clayton lab in Melbourne. Recently, the company revealed a Brisbane patient was mistakenly implanted with another patient's embryo. The patient gave birth to a baby who had no genetic link to her. Let's go back to National Press Club in Canberra now. ABC's national political lead, David Spears, is there with our national affairs correspondent, Jane Norman, for more on the Prime Minister's address. Over to you two.
Ros, thank you, and apologies for the background noise here. This speech just wrapped up with the Prime Minister, Jane Norman, with me. And Jane, there was quite a bit in what we heard from Anthony Albanese. First, the announcements that he made in the speech before we get to what came out of the questions, particularly in relation to concerns, complaints being raised with the US administration over what we saw yesterday. A Channel 9 reporter appeared to be hit by a rubber bullet or another sort of projectile during the protests, covering the protests in LA. Also his comments on defence spending, and we'll get to all of that. But the announcements, a round table to be held in August in Parliament House, a slimmed-down version of the Jobs and Skills Summit that we saw in the first term of the Labor government. This round table focused on bringing business, unions, others together to find new paths towards boosting productivity, growth and wages. He's laid down the sort of goals that he would like to achieve from this, but Jane, this will excite some in the business community that suddenly there might be an opening here to go beyond what Labor took to the election, to look at new ideas to spur some economic growth and productivity in this term.
Yeah, certainly. There is a lot of pressure on the government, given its resounding election victory, to perhaps be more ambitious with its agenda now. It might be we're entering a new era of politics of stability, the first Prime Minister in 20 years to be re-elected to a second term. So there's a real pressure on the government to use that. And one of the biggest structural issues, the Treasurer will even say, in the economy is this issue of productivity. There's a general consensus that we need to improve productivity to improve our living standards, but it has been stubbornly low for years now and is seen as one of the key issues. And so one of the government's solutions to this, we know the Productivity Commission is already looking at it, but that they will be bringing together business, industry and unions to find what the Prime Minister described as win-wins on this issue.
Yeah, win-wins. He's put some guardrails around this, though, it's fair to say. As a Labor Prime Minister, he's not about to strip away penalty rates. He's not about to cut real wage growth that finally we're starting to see. You know, these are the sort of markers that he's laying down that don't get your hopes up that we're suddenly going to unwind industrial relations reform that Labor put in place in the first term. So I think he's made that clear. I think the one thing that he kept coming back to whenever he was talking about this and in the questions he was asked about it were approvals for housing. We know that a lot of the regulation around housing approvals has been a big problem. It's often at the state and local government level. But also approvals around energy infrastructure as well. This great renewables rollout that is underway and needs to speed up if we're going to get to the government's targets on renewables and climate emissions. It's again trying to speed up those approval processes, because those in the industry always point out this is one of the big handbrakes they face. That ties in with the changes that are needed on the environment laws, though. Yes. So, look, it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that round table, how that then feeds into the environment laws that Labor will be shaping in this term. He also announced new faces at the head of the public service, the head of the Prime Minister and Cabinet, the Department of PM&C, as it's known. Stephen Kennedy, the Treasury Secretary, will step up into the top job in the Australian public service, and Jenny Wilkinson, who currently leads finance, will go into Treasury. This had been expected?
This had been expected. I know that there was certainly a push within government, within the Prime Minister's sort of own office, to ensure that there were senior women leading the public service. There were more men than women, and so
and this will be the first woman to lead the Treasury.
That's correct. It has been noted that Jenny Wilkinson will be the first woman to lead the Treasury Department. But putting aside her gender, she is extremely qualified. Stephen Kennedy, we know, was Jim Chalmers' right-hand man during the first term of Labor's government, seen as a really crucial figure in Labor's economic agenda. They have a very close relationship, and so, he's obviously moving now to the Prime Minister's department, having clearly done what the government wanted him to do in Treasury.
Yeah, and look, Stephen Kennedy was appointed to the head of Treasury under the Coalition in 2019, so he's worked with both sides of government and won a lot of praise from both sides of government. He did, however, clash with Angus Taylor as Shadow Treasurer just prior to the campaign, people might remember, over coalition policies and the costings of them and
Correct,
so on.
yep.
Jenny Wilkinson was in the running for the RBA governor job. Didn't get that. Michelle Bullock, of course, got that job. But anyway, so a couple of new senior appointments there in the public service. Then to the questions that we heard, and look, they covered so many different areas, from education to housing to health to deaths in custody. The answers, though, that really broke some new ground, I thought, coming back to that LA protest and what we saw yesterday with the Channel 9 reporter, I thought the Prime Minister's language, it surprised me how much concern he was willing to express and criticism of what's happened there.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we know that the Prime Minister is expected to hold his first face-to-face meeting with Donald Trump on the sidelines of next week's G7 summit. Mr Albanese has gone to great lengths to not outwardly criticise other nations, and obviously our relationship with the US is a very important one, but he said very clearly that, well, he has Australia has made representations to the United States. We assume that possibly has come through our ambassador, Kevin Rudd. Mr Albanese himself has spoken to Lauren this morning. He said it was unacceptable. She was unambiguously a media representative doing her job, and he seemed to suggest that he believes she was in fact targeted, whether it was by the LAPD or another arm of the US armed forces, but it was totally unacceptable in his mind for a journalist, as it is, to be targeted doing their jobs.
And he spoke to her this morning, and I think that sends a signal as much as anything that the Prime Minister of Australia is intervening in this and having a chat, checking, making she's okay, and then making it clear at this platform, this very public platform at the National Press Club, how concerned he is over that. In terms of what else, he was willing to canvass ahead of the meeting with Donald Trump, that still hasn't been locked in as far as we're aware, but you're going to be there at the G7 summit with the Prime Minister, and this you would expect it would happen at the sidelines of that summit. If Donald Trump goes there, there's a fair bit going on in the United States right now. But look, he's really not willing to give ground, or flag that he's willing to give ground, on the trade front or defence spending. And Jane, that gets us to the defence question that you asked and a few others asked as well. What did we learn from the Prime Minister on his willingness to do more on defence?
Well, we learned that, he says in his words, of course, the government will always provide for capability that is needed. And so what he's saying there is that the government does currently have a spending target of hitting 2.3% of GDP by 2033. That's clearly not a cap or a ceiling for the Prime Minister. He's not willing to nominate a target, despite other countries around the world, increasing their ambition or accelerating their funding.
He's really ridiculing the whole
spends.
target setting approach.
And we said it's arbitrary, and that no other portfolio in government would have an expectation that in health, for example, you could say we'll spend 4% on health by 2030. So he's sort of ridiculing that argument and saying if a proposal is put forward on its merits, the government would, consider that for funding, and that's the approach that he'll take. But I think it's interesting. He's saying certainly not that the government is closed to the idea of spending more. It's just that he's not willing to set a target for how much more we should spend.
Yeah, and look, that may not be what the US wants to hear. We know Pete Hegseth, the Defence Secretary, has just been meeting a week or so ago with Richard Marles, who was here today, saying we want Australia to spend 3.5% of GDP. And the clear response from the PM is no, we're not setting any sort of targets. Just one final one quickly. Perhaps a lighter one, but I wonder if this is one we'll come back to at some point. On social media, what did the PM say? That you shouldn't look back at what someone said 10 years ago on social media and hold it against them necessarily.
I mean, this is an issue that comes up in every election campaign where dirt operations on both sides will trawl through the social media accounts of candidates to see if they can find something controversial that might undermine their chances of winning that seat.
And but Labor's never done that, Jane.
No,
Labor's never done that.
Labor doesn't have a sophisticated dirt unit like the coalition, like all parties. But he's saying here that you shouldn't be held to the comments that you make as a 21-year-old 10 years later, because of course the world changes, standards change, and you shouldn't be held to the same standards. So
I think a lot of parents would applaud that sort of sentiment and say, look, kids do say stupid things on social media. It shouldn't be held against them in 10 years' time. Whether this changes the way politics is played by the Labor Party, though, let alone the other side of politics, we'll see, because you're right, it's a constant. It's a constant dragging
Let's
up
see in
things
2028.
exactly, things that have been said 10 years ago or even more that are so often held against them.
Yeah.
Anyway, Jane, thank you. Busy afternoon ahead for you, and Ros will hand it back to you.
Devon and Jane, thank you both.